Hi, welcome to the third episode of the Lockdown webinar series. I'm Seraj Toefy, the head of Africa for Centuro Global. We're going to be discussing rebuilding this week. We have a great international panel of experts that I interview. I really hope you enjoy it all. And we'll start off with Asma being the rose amongst the thorns. But what do you think that a business is? And let's focus not on big corporates at this stage. Let's talk on small to medium-sized businesses. What do you think the focus should be on now, and then again just after lockdown?
Well, thanks very much, Siraj, and great to be here and talking to a panel in South Africa, particularly. So in terms of what I think, this is coronavirus, but I've actually been through the 2008 crash already when I was a very tiny micro business with only a couple of people. So for me, I think at that time, how I managed to survive and to build the company is a lesson to sort of what I'd actually tell people now as well. So although coronavirus is actually having a much bigger and much more impactful impression on other people's lives, the 2008 crisis did also have a huge impact in the number of corporates and financial services and recruitment issues that came about at that time. So right now, I think the mode is survival. It's ensuring that you as a small business can get through the next few months without any sort of financial impact on you or your company, and that you can bounce back at a later date. So what I'm finding, and a lot of people that are saying to me, startups particularly, is the cash flow issue. So it's the runway, for example, if you've got a company where you've had regular revenue and your survival has been that daily activity, and therefore you've got your billing, your invoicing, you're covered with your expenses. But if you're building a tech product, for example, you may have had investment in, or you may have allocated money to build something that you're going to release or launch. Those companies don't actually have any kind of income that they're generating. So if during this time, all activity stops, then those are the ones that are actually going to struggle the most. And it's trying to find solutions and trying to find ways where we can overcome these next 3 months to be able to look at the positive side of what are we going to do when we do come to the other side? How are we then going to rebuild? And just to kind of give you an idea of what happened back in 2008, and we were a team of 3 in 2008. It was myself and 2 other people. And I was servicing a lot of the corporate clients. So there were oil and gas companies. And suddenly, overnight, we were told that this crash was happening. So 2 of my clients, who were the largest that we had, that actually has served all the salaries and whatever expenses that we had, just stopped recruiting, stopped sending expats to other countries. And when that happened, we kind of thought, well, what do we do now? How do we manage? So instead of worrying about the revenue side, what I did was that I saw that a lot of firms had stopped recruitment. So I went out and I saw that the government had introduced a website called the Graduate Talent Pool. And so because so many talented young people were not getting jobs, I went out and offered internships to people to come and work for free, to volunteer, and to help us build the brand. And I managed to get some amazing, amazing individuals who came on board. And as a result of those recruitments, they stayed on all the way to 10 years after that. We managed to actually pivot the direction that we took. We worked on our brand, we worked on our marketing, and we evolved as a company in 15 countries with 1,500 staff. Only, I would say, 6 years later. So, wow. There are benefits out of a crisis as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Josh, I think if I read in your bio, one of your first companies you started was just after that crash. Am I right? Out in New York?
Yeah, it was actually during the middle of the financial crisis. So everything Asma is saying it resonates completely. The most successful point of my career was 2008 to 2010. And I think it goes back to really thinking, if you're an entrepreneur, what is the macro opportunity? So I think you do have to step back from the tactical day-to-day, keeping your business alive and the lifeline, and really do some deep thought experiments about what the world's going to look like in 1, 3, 6, 12 months, because I personally am of the belief that this world is actually going to look very, very different. In 2008 to 2010, we did have this massive recession, but it was relatively V-shaped, and it was what happened before and what happened after were relatively similar. I'm of the opinion, or I'm at least preparing myself, that the world post-COVID could be very different than the world pre-COVID. So what does that mean for your business? What does that mean for you as a person? What does that mean for what you do in terms of, are you finding meaning in your work? So from a very pragmatic business standpoint, very similar to Asma, like we saw a macro opportunity. I was working at an investment bank, the entire market dislocated. We said, hey, let's get in the middle of this. We bought a broker-dealer license. We started our own boutique investment bank. We hired some of the best professionals in the world, because all of a sudden Lehman and Bear Stearns and everybody was unemployed. Everyone was super hungry. Everyone really wanted to get in the middle, and it was incredibly successful. I ended up leaving that business and going back to my former employer, but it really sparked that entrepreneurial spirit in me. So the things I'm really thinking about right now, and I would say for all of our startups at LaunchLab, what is your macro view? Your business tomorrow may be very different than your business was a couple of weeks ago. And holding on to the past, it's a sunk cost fallacy. So think about what tomorrow looks like, and think about the opportunities that are going to present in this new world. We've totally reshuffled the deck. Things are going to be very, very different. Different industries are going to pop up. So where can you get between the wall and the wallpaper in this new normal? And I'm thinking a lot about what that new normal looks like. The second part is really thinking about the business that we've built. So for me, I'm a pretty conservative person. I was the CFO of a couple companies, and when you're CFO, you are responsible for, frankly, keeping the lights on and being sometimes the person who always says no. But really think about the business that you're building. Do you have cash flow from operations? Are you just effectively funding your loss or your negative operating profit through financing? What if that financing goes away? What does it really mean to run a sustainable business that frankly doesn't need potentially outside investors in times of crisis? So really start thinking about what the business looks like and thinking about the metrics that really matter. Like go back to your financial statements right now and think about what's my variable cost versus my fixed cost, what's my runway at a 50% revenue decrease scenario, things like that. And I think the last piece, which Asma hit on perfectly, we've hired 3 people in the last 2 weeks. We're finding absolutely incredible talent who want to work hard, who believe in our mission and values, who want to help rebuild. And they're saying, we'll come work with you. We'll do it on a trial basis. And I'm very confident those people could be with us similarly for 5, 6, 10 years because they see the tomorrow that we want to build. So my big piece of advice here is take a step back, take a deep breath, and really think about what the world's going to look like in a couple months and where you want to be part of that, because holding on to the past, I just think is going to be something that makes us all crazy and probably isn't going to materialize anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So yeah, there's been some great input already. Let me throw that same question back to you and your thoughts on kind of, because there's a couple of themes that have really been already raised. One is kind of pivoting. Asma raised the whole fact of pivoting as that happened. Josh was talking about, using the opportunity. What do you think businesses should be focusing on right now when it comes to right now and after lockdown?
So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me just say as a start, the whole idea, and I've been doing a lot of thinking around rebuilding after lockdown. And in all honesty, I have to say that there are days where I'm like, it's just too soon for me to even think about that, because it's just so hard and just so sort of personally tough to kind of get your mind to be thinking around what's happening going forward when you're sort of in firefighting mode. But I think the great lesson here is that about living and leading within this complexity. And so as a leader and as an entrepreneur leader, you have to kind of nobody can predict the future, but sort of take a punt on it, right? And say, this is what I think the future is going to be. And then iteratively move your plan forward as that's either close to what happens or it's not. And so I think just as a start, just the idea of sort of coming into a discussion like this is just to sort of acknowledge how difficult it is to get yourself into that headspace as a start. I think when we start looking forward, I kind of echo what Josh and Asma were saying, is that, yes, don't quit, pivot. So hopefully in this time, you've managed to pivot some of your services If you've learned to run your business more frugally, keep that. If you've managed to kind of negotiate a lower cost base or operating expenses, keep that, and then try and sort of light up other areas of your business that are able to operate outside of a lockdown environment. Because I think the key essence here is to say that level of resilience that hopefully you have begun to try and create for yourself and for your business, how do you maintain that going forward into the medium and long term? And so saying, what are those shock absorbers that you can have within your personal finances, within your business finances, that allow you to take on other knocks at the moment. So this happens to be a global pandemic going forward, but going forward there will be other bumps that you'll take as a business, and the plan really should be to say, how do you start building in the absorption mechanisms to be able to take on further variables going forward.
Do you guys think that, because when I was thinking about the what we're busy with, you've got big corporates that I think can survive quite long. They've got shareholders, they've got deep pockets in a lot of ways, and yes, they have a lot of staff that they need to look after, but I feel that they can survive for slightly longer. Then you've got the one-man band or freelancer who can reduce his costs all the way down and just kind of work from home and survive. But it's that middle portion of business, that medium-sized business that employs 10, 20, 30 people. Do you think those are the guys getting hit the hardest during this time?
I would say yes and no. It depends really on the business as well. I mean, again, looking at people that have spoken to me, I think here what's key is leadership communication, leadership direction, and being able to engage with the people within that organization. So if you're employing 10 to 20 people or whatever the number is, I think it's getting everyone on board and being transparent and as clear as you can as to what is going on, because everyone is in it together. Everyone is feeling the pinch, and there's nothing hidden that you need to kind of keep from the teams. And I think you'll find that when you communicate with people quite openly, people are quite happy to come on board and make suggestions and find ways in which you can actually find solutions to those issues. So for example, I had a client actually last week, and he said he was providing insurance and medical devices to the sports sector. And with everything having been cancelled with that kind of industry group completely, he's now shut down and zero revenue. So he had a team of about 12. And what he's done is he's completely shut himself down as well. So he says, I don't know how to communicate to my teams that I can't pay them their salaries, I can't actually pay for the expenses, but I know we'll be okay, because as soon as the lockdown is over, we will bounce back. But in this interim period, I don't know what to do. But when I actually delved into his circumstances, what I realized is that he hadn't given consideration to the fact that he has his own personal funds or money, he has options. So what he had been doing is looking purely at it from a business perspective, that I can't go for a business loan because I don't want to take a debt. The government isn't giving me enough because I can't resolve some of my issues. I can furlough staff, but at the same time, I can't furlough everybody because during this period, I will need to have some people working. But what he did have is that he had somebody that had left him some money in a will in the last 12 months, which he had been saving up for property. And what he could have done is utilize some of that cash and injected it into his business in the interim, and then try to rebuild that. And then after lockdown, he could try and find other solutions. But I think mentally, he was so stressed and anxious that he didn't realize that being a leader, being, in a business, you've got to actually inspire and motivate people yourself. You've got to lead by example. So it's really important that if you're leading a business and you're founding a business, that you give that impression to the people around you, which are positive, and there is something to look forward to or to look ahead towards. Because if you cave in now, then what are you going to expect from the rest of the team? Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in there, or just the fact that, to pick up from Asma's point, it's the leadership now that's going to determine the future of how you're going to treat or the kind of success you can have afterwards. Josh, you were talking about the fact that the 2008 was a V. it's how you operate within the down, this peak. It's almost what is the opposite, the big valley. It's how you operate now that's going to truly determine the success afterwards. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about this crisis or what's happening is it forces you to. Most companies want to do 10 different things, and we're building this platform to route all these products. And if you work with curious, inquisitive people, everyone brings a new idea every day. But in the startup world, you are effectively a company on steroids, right? Everything happens a lot faster. Your runway is shorter. You have to get one thing right. And if you don't get that one thing right, you're not going to live to play another day. I find even in the business at LaunchLab, we were, as I step back, and I've had time now with the lockdown and being able to really step back from the chaos of the day-to-day and really examine what are we doing. And we've realized we're holding a symposium tomorrow and Friday to go through our business model and really step back and say, okay, what are we as a business? What are we looking to do? What are the 10 things we're going to say no to that we've been doing for the last however many months or years, but don't add value and aren't important? So let's let those things go. It actually is an amazing opportunity to cleanse away all these things that are legacy, whether they're recurring meetings you don't need, whether they're partners who aren't really providing value, whether it's services you're providing that you're not really realizing the benefits of. How do you get uber hyper focused right now? And then as a leader, I totally agree. How do you become transparent? But then also, how do you make sure that every person on your team knows I have to execute this one thing over the next 1 month? When we're not talking 3 months, we're not talking 6 months, we're not talking 12 months. What do I have to get done over the next month? And how does that contribute to the overall company surviving and thriving in this environment? So to me, I actually love the focus. Like, I think this is an incredible opportunity to let go of things and really focus on that one critical thing that you have to get right. The last piece there is just be present. I mean, we all live in the future. We all think about the past. Be present and take it literally day by day and say, okay, what am I doing today to move forward? And if you put together 30 of those, then you're going to be getting ahead. If you put together 60 of those, that's going to be even better. So I think leadership is absolutely critical right now. And really ask yourself, what can I let go of? And what do I really need to focus on in order to be successful?
Okay.
If I just kind of pick up on your original question, just around who do you think is going to be impacted the most, right? I would have a punt, and maybe it's because of, by virtue of the fact that I lead a medium-sized business, is that I think we pride ourselves on being agile, and yet very many agile businesses are in fact fragile. And so it's a question to ask yourself that when you have an agile business that kind of relies on constant cash flow all the time, how can you mitigate that and rather, as I say, build resilience and actually say, well, we need to build a good balance sheet to be able to borrow against that, and really try and change the mindset around that. And that's something we've done over the last couple of months and year or two, in saying that even though we want to be an agile business, we really want to actually own some commercial property. We want to invest into other things that are perhaps have diversified what we do. So we'll stick to our knitting in terms of what we do. But even though we are an agile business, how can we think more like a business, like a holding company that requires sort of different investments to be able to survive that? So that's just my thought on that, because I think it is hard. I think in my business, there's a high burn rate, and the maths is, you don't have to be Josh and be a CFO of a company to work out how long you can survive when you have sort of relatively high overheads and no income. And then it asks you all kinds of ethical questions about how do you handle that? And so within our organization, and some of our people are on the line or on this chat at the moment, is we've said, let's share this burden, right? And so even the kind of traditional roles of business owner and like employee, kind of, it just sort of brings us all together and says, we're in this together. We have to share the burden. So let's try and all of us reduce our salary by 80%. And an announcement that we're going to make to sort of set that example is that the Exco are going to reduce their salary by 50%, because that sort of moves the needle the most. And we perhaps are in the best position to be able to access personal credit lines and get through 2-3 months of lower kind of income and stuff like that. So those are some of the really practical things that we're doing to be able to sort of absorb this and say, and people then joke and say, oh, could we actually get rid of like John and Sarah and all move to 83%? You know, like people can actually get to a point where they can laugh and joke about it because we're all in this together, and it's not just kind of putting it onto the leadership of the company, but everybody kind of feels part of it. And then the last thing I want to say, just to agree with Josh a little bit, is that we have to see this as an opportunity. And maybe the best opportunity, you know, particularly in a South African market where everything's just sort of sluggish and it's moving along slowly. We've got to say, well, there are going to be some of your competitors that are going to be absolutely obliterated by this. And if you're an entrepreneur, you are then, just by virtue of calling yourself an entrepreneur, you're a street fighter. You're able to kind of, you're not expecting like a big cushy paycheck and kind of benefits and stuff like that, you know. So we've got to kind of double down on who we are as these street fighters and go out there and take up those opportunities as soon as the gates open up. We really have to kind of see it as a rush towards which clients are not serviced right now, what opportunities are there to buy things in this kind of new wave as we kick off into hopefully an intermediate phase into kind of normal life after this lockdown.
So I think, I mean, there are some questions that are starting to come. There's one question from Riyadh in the general chat. If I can ask, we'll ask that one as well. But if you ask the questions in the Q&A section, then people can vote for those questions and we can kind of prioritize those. In the meantime, I just wanted to say all of us have had experience. I mean, we based in South Africa, except for Asma, but you have, I mean, you traveled to Pakistan and you kind of advise there with the president and that forum. Josh, you've set up businesses in Africa and India. Shukri, you've had businesses into Africa. Where do you guys, and let's again start with Asma, what do you think that developing countries can teach the bigger countries, or how can we be more resilient and fight better at this stage? How do you think that's possible? And that's a question to you guys.
Yeah, sorry. So I think just taking Pakistan as an example. So when I went, it was just before the lockdown happened actually, and there was some talks of the coronavirus happening in the UK, but a lot of people in denial that it was actually going to take off in the way that it did. But I was invited by the Prime Minister at that time to come and talk about opening up a Oxford equivalent university. So they're opening a global village in a region in Pakistan and sort of building an entire architecture where they will bring talented individuals from Pakistan to study there. Now, in terms of Pakistan, it's a pretty poor country. So the majority there, you know, I think in terms of survival and so forth, a lockdown in Pakistan is completely dire, because I would say the vast number of people, their livelihoods are on the streets and they rely on the day-to-day earnings that they get. The tax system is pretty poor. And so what the Prime Minister is actually doing right now is that he is rallying a lot of the diaspora in other countries to come together and to provide donations to the country, to create funds where they are distributing to people locally to be able to support them. So the government itself doesn't have the capacity or the capability to be able to offer the relief options that some of these developed countries have. But at the same time, I think what is good about the poorer countries, and particularly Pakistan, and I guess the reason probably why more so now Pakistan is because Imran Khan himself, when you look at leadership, he as a leader is quite inspiring. Mm-hmm. So he may not be the best person in terms of politics. He may not have had the experience and the background that he's come from a political sort of experience. But if you look at who he is as a person and how he presents himself to the world, people are very inspired by who he is. And I think he gets a lot of following in that sense. So when you look around the world, in the US, and you look at the UK, you look at Europe, you look at other countries, people actually feel that they belong to him. They come from far and wide. And I was sat in that room where we went to this Oxford village, and he had 40 people in this room. People had come from the US, they'd come from all kinds of places, Canada. And in 20 minutes, he raised £15 million, right? And he hadn't even started raising. People had just committed themselves to this entire thing, purely on the basis of his belief, the fact that he has integrity. So I think what he is doing right now is he is going out to people in other countries, and he is asking for funds, and he is getting the funds, and he is distributing those locally to people, whoever need them. I mean, Pakistan had taken off recently with its tech, particularly with lots of the accelerators and the incubators that had kind of come up. But obviously this is going to hit the country quite hard. It's going to be critical and see how they will bounce back from it. But I think they do have quite a lot of support from their overseas nationals.
I'm not sure, Shukri, you want to jump in there on your thoughts on what Africa can
Josh, do you want to go? Josh unmuted himself first.
Oh, sorry.
Go for
I
it,
didn't know.
Shukri.
I thought I'd change
After
it
you.
around.
No worries. After you.
One of you. Josh, go. Anyone.
All right, so I'll take it. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that I've been personally very impressed by the leadership in South Africa. I've really felt like there was a lot of transparency, that they really got in front of what was happening. And thus, we may get a head start on the rest of the world. I mean, the rest of the world is still figuring out how to contain, how to treat, how to get the economies, I mean, if in time, get the economies re-going. So if this all goes as planned, I do think South Africa may have a few month head start on rebuilding, on getting started again. What does that mean? Like, what is South Africa's competitive advantage versus other emerging markets or quote unquote developed markets? One thing I think about is the world is still going to be somewhat, in some ways, similar to when we left. The climate is something that we focus on a lot. It's something I've built for the last 6 years. I've spent building 2 clean energy companies across sub-Saharan Africa. We know that in South Africa, if we look insular a bit, we have some issues around our energy generation, around our climate. These are going to be real opportunities to look at the infrastructure of our own company or our own country and say, what do we need to do to rebuild? If there were ever questions before about Eskom being viable or about that being a sustainable source of energy, I think that's probably off the table. So what can we do now to really reshuffle the deck and think about internally, what do we want to focus on with our money, our resources, our time? If we start thinking about what do we do in the world economy and what do we start exporting? My hypothesis actually is that the international economy is going to take a lot longer to get going than people anticipate. So how do we export things digitally? Being able to develop software development within South Africa. We have tons of smart people. Software development is something that can be done anywhere in the world. We can export to anywhere in the world. Our talent is very high and our pricing is very low. So that is, you see it in Eastern Europe, you've seen it in other places. If at LaunchLab, we're actually putting together, we did a pilot last year for a coding school where we brought in, we had 12 students last year. We had over 150 applications, and we helped train them up to bring them from basically learned through pragmatic to startups or to companies in terms of software development. If we can bring that to scale, then we could have hundreds, if not thousands, of software developers that we can export to the world that don't need to get on a plane, don't need to be traveling abroad, can do that digitally. So I think things like that, where in the meantime, can we really insert ourselves into the global economy? The last place actually too is this idea of leapfrogging. There are a lot of different industries across Africa that I feel like could serve the rest of the world in terms of the gig economy and other things. One of the things I'm thinking a lot about as well is how do we use this as an opportunity when Africa opens back up again to become much more international? So how do we think about bringing South Africans to Lagos and Nigerians to Kenya and vice versa, and really take some of our learnings from South Africa, take some of the different intricacies of those markets and start that confluence of information that I think leads to new industries being built and new ideas being generated. So I personally think it's a great opportunity to look inside before we look outside and figure out, okay, within South Africa, what do we want to rebuild? And then if we are looking outside, what are the things that we can do so digitally or do so in a way that does bring talent, expertise, and ideas back to South Africa as well?
Yeah, so for me, in terms of, I think as a developing market, quote unquote, just even before the coronavirus, I think there are many things that we can teach an ever-changing sort of world, right? And so the first thing is that this idea of asymmetrical growth. So the fact that you can have 2 markets in one, and this massive inequality, particularly in South Africa, we live in a very sort of developed market of between 5 and 8 million people, and then 45 to 50 million people that are in a very different sort of market. And we've been sort of operating in an environment like that for a long time. So the question is, how can we teach that to the world? In the rest of the continent, having done work in over 17 African countries, this idea of sort of piecemeal development. We understand that there's certain things that work and certain linkages that link and other ones that don't, and then find innovative ways to kind of bypass that. And so that's the sort of level of innovation that has always existed within the sort of African context. I think there's the big key thing, I think, when we start thinking about what are the opportunities going forward from an African perspective is around digitization. So, I mean, there have been so many memes and jokes and saying that like, who kind of fast-tracked the digitization of your organization? Was it the CEO, the CTO? No, it wasn't. It was coronavirus, right? So I think some people's businesses have changed more in 1 week than they have in like 10 to 15 years. And so we've got to sort of really sort of understand that that's really where the opportunity is going to lie within this gig economy, to be able to operate in this digital economy more meaningfully. The really sad part, though, if I have to be honest, is that I think in South Africa as well, we see the digital divide really entrench this inequality even more. So we take for granted the fact that, you know, we can work from home. The idea of working from home is an inherently middle-class concept. The idea of stockpiling and being able to put food away is an inherently middle-class concept. And so we've really got to try and fast-track that and lobby government to be able to fast-track digitization in the rest of the country. And I mean, I think, you know, the problem, and again, now I'm not going to go into the problem only, but in South Africa, I think we have real economic opportunities, but there isn't alignment with respect to the political and the banking and the tax system. And I think if you look at sort of places in the world that have really thrived, Singapore, even a place like Portugal and Lisbon at the moment, where everybody from London wants to go live in Lisbon, and it's much cheaper to live there, but you can kind of still operate in other parts of Europe, is because there's alignment around political, banking, tax, and all the kind of talent retention systems that allow us to be able to thrive. Having said that, a year or two ago, I had the fortune of listening to Jack Ma speak in South Africa while he was here. And the one thing he said to someone who asked him a question complaining about the banking system was he looked at him and he said, dude, stop complaining about the banking system. I've traveled to every country in the world almost, and I've spoken to entrepreneurs anyway. Banks don't help entrepreneurs anyway. Get over it. Find smart financing options. Find smart ways to leverage your own competitive advantages to be able to finance correctly. And so again, just to go back to what Asma was saying around what your options are. I have bought my own home, actually. The second property that I bought was financed not through a bank, through someone who I bought it from. I said, hey, dude, do you want to give me the loan? Like, let's not get the banks involved, man. Do you really need the money? Or can I just start paying you back, you know, at an interest rate? So there are things we can do. We've just got to get out of this like traditional mindset of how things happen. And really try and find ways to leverage the competitive advantages that we have.
Cool. Guys, there's nice questions coming up now, and I see that people are voting on which questions I should ask first. So let me jump straight into that, because I think it will cover some of the few things that I had planned to ask you anyway. But right at the top, it kind of says, what advice do you have for the casualties of lockdown, as not everyone is going to make it through? I mean, I think that's one of those realities as well, is that we can talk and we can do all of these things, but some people aren't going to make it through. What would you, who wants to take a stab? And we don't always all have to answer every question, but if you do have a thought, what do you have? I think Josh is demiked.
Yeah.
Whenever he demutes, whatever, then I know he's got something to say. So
yeah,
go for it, Josh.
I'll speak just to entrepreneurs. And I think Shukri said it before, but I mean, welcome to entrepreneurism. Of those 6 ventures I've started, a couple of those have been total failures. I mean, I've had to close the door. I've had to lay people off. I've had to look myself in the mirror and say, how stupid could you be? So, I mean, I think part of it is like, whether it's COVID, whether it's financial crisis, whether it was just a bad business plan, welcome. Like, this is the world. This is how this thing works. So now you dust yourself off, you step back, you learn from your experiences, you figure out what you did well, what you could have done better. I'm somewhere in between companies number 3 and 4 because I realized I needed to learn more. I needed better mentors. I needed to really rethink this whole thing because business number 3 was terrible. So I think I have this concept that you live your life in beta, that you're always experimenting, you're always hypothesis testing, you're always learning. And so I think this is a good opportunity just to see how resilient you are. There's a great book that I'd recommend called Grit by Angela Duckworth, which talks about having grit means you have passion plus perseverance. So you find something you really love, and then you persevere, and you have to just keep iterating and keep figuring out how to get there. In the meantime, like, figure out what your expenses are, figure out how to keep the lights on, figure out how to survive and live to play another day. But I would say in some ways, like, learn how to fail fail elegantly, and learn how to get back up even and stronger than before, because that is the mark of a real true entrepreneur and a true leader, is how high you bounce when you fall.
Yeah, that's great. I actually agree with everything that you just said, Josh. But one thing I would also add to that, I think, is that you should seek advice. And I think mentorship, or having people around you that can actually provide advice about the current state of play that you're in, is actually extremely valuable. Because when you're an entrepreneur and you've got your own company, it's pretty lonely in there. You don't have anyone to talk to. There've been often times, I remember when I first started the business, where I thought I would quit and give up, and I didn't know where to go next. And you put your head in your hands and you think, well, that's it, I'm going to fail. But you've really got to talk to people. I never did that. I talked to myself and lifted it up again. But I think having come out the other side and seen and talked to so many people, it's really important, because you may think it's time to give up, but there may be people around you that may say to you, or they may spot opportunities. And exactly what Shukri was saying, that, I bought my house and I asked somebody whether they'd be agreed to sort of take an interest on it. And that's the way that I would go into ownership of a property. I mean, that's really new. It's innovative. It's creative. So find ways to survive without having to say, well, I'm a casualty. I can't do anything about it. This is the crisis, and therefore everyone will understand. But before you give up, I think find some options to seek advice.
So, I mean, I want to just say something. Is that the one thing that the pandemic has done, the lockdown, it's a global lockdown. In any other time when your business fails, it's often fails because of internal things, or there isn't a market or anything else. Right now, if you're failing, you are most likely failing because the market has just been removed away completely. Everything's locked down. When that lockdown comes up, and you still have the knowledge and the people and the manpower, you should be able to continue. So the level of how much you die is really based on how resilient you can bounce back from. Because are you really dead, or are you dead right now because there isn't any revenue coming on? When it lifts, can I continue going? That's just my little input before I get to the next question. Shukri, I'm going to leave you on that one, unless you've got something burning.
The one thing that I would say, though, is that we cannot underestimate what stress can do to you. And that's the one thing that I would say is, like, don't lose your own quality of life as a result of it. And so we can sit here and speak theoretically, perhaps as relatively successful entrepreneurs, around failing fast and all of these traditional things that we typically say. But when you lose your house or you lose your income, it's a really stressful thing. And the one thing that I would say is to try and find a way to hold on to your mental and physical health in this time, because the psychological and physical stress is, again, honestly, to be honest, I was half dreading coming to speak about this, because psychologically and emotionally, like, I wasn't ready to speak post-lockdown. Like, I've just been so down and angry about, my business partner described it. He said, it's like we have a patisserie shop in France and we're trying to sell baguettes, but there are tankers coming down the road because it's World War II. It's like you just can't sell your baguettes anymore. And it's really, really horrible. So it's hard. We can quote Rumi and say it's all rigged in your favor, but let's not skirt over just how horribly stressful and dangerous stress is at this time.
Absolutely, and I mentor a lot of companies, and we in the incubators that we mentor, we don't normally offer psychological kind of and life coaching and psychological help. It's more mentoring, but we're finding that we're needing to add that now, because there are some companies that are literally at the edge. They are collapsing internally. So a big part of our job as mentors has changed from growth to survival and just keeping people focused in the right way. So can I just say, Riyadh asked, can you touch on startups that are pre-revenue stages? I would appreciate advice on how people in this space between idea and revenue can assess whether to continue with the current trajectory. And I think his other question was on this side. Yeah, the current trajectory. Yeah, so I'm going to go to Josh for that one. You involved in an environment that's probably best to answer that.
No, it's a great question. I mean, I mean, in the end, it's all about runway, right? I mean, personal runway as well as business runway. If you are pre-revenue, obviously you're not bringing in money, so your burn is going to be whatever your expenses are. So I think you have to step back and look at it personally and say, how long can I continue with this idea? Does this allow me to personally stay solvent? How much time and effort can I put into this? If this whole thing takes 6 months to go through, does that make sense? I would say, are there ways to extend your runway? Can you do some consulting work? Could you do something on the side just to keep the runway going? Even for us, I mean, we're looking out the world now and doing fundraising. So we're helping companies think about fundraising. It's not core to our business right now, but at the same time, it does increase our runway, and it actually helps companies out there to continue their process of growing as well. So it's hard to say. I mean, if you feel like you have that idea, if you're passionate about it, then think of all the things you can do to extend your personal runway, whether it's increasing your revenue personally or decreasing your expenses personally. That's super, super important. Or there's going to be a lot of assistance out there. There's going to be a lot of free money flowing around. One of my real lessons of building businesses in Africa is that everything takes a lot longer than you expect. The more non-dilutive capital that you can raise, the better. If you can spend a day a week applying for grants, spend a day a week thinking about alternative revenue sources that may not have existed before that could give you additional runway, I would recommend doing that. But I mean, don't lose sight of your dreams. Just keep your eye on the long term, on the North Star, that it may take longer. And so what can you do in order to give yourself that time to see this materialize?
Okay. The next question here is, and I think we might have answered it already, is what options are there for many businesses in South Africa that don't have strong cash flow, investment options, personal savings, where rebuilding and pivoting could not be an option versus surviving? I'm not sure if it,
so I'll have just a quick, because maybe Asma can't speak too much about from a South African infrastructure perspective. Again, I'm actually going to go back to the kind of casualty and failure question a little bit, in that one of the real considerations should be we fold? Like, I think sometimes people hold on too long, and if this was an opportunity that sort of allows you almost in a graceful way to say that, like, COVID-19 took me out, and this is what it was. I wasn't a bad business person. It just kind of took me out, right? So there's a narrative you can build on that. So I think one has to look at that and say, how can we fail quickly, fail forward, and move on? In terms of the innovative ways that you can sort of try and survive if you have no cash flow and you aren't able to liquidate assets or something like that, it would be around just negotiating. You'd be surprised what you can negotiate, particularly in moments like this. Really trying to string people out, saying, writing acknowledgements of debt and saying, listen, I can't pay my rent at the moment, but I can pay 50%. Try really hard to get into doing mode rather than just like head in pillow mode and crying. Rather write to people and say, hey, I acknowledge the fact that I haven't paid rent. I acknowledge the fact that I haven't paid my cell phone bill. I acknowledge the fact that I haven't paid for my car, whatever it may be. You'd be surprised how many months you can go by negotiating different options in that respect.
Cool. Let me just, sorry. The next question is, could you touch on fundraising strategy for concept pre-revenue startups at the moment for ventures developed now in response to new market identified now that SA is in downgraded or junk mode. Sorry, so let me try and translate or try and make sense of that a little bit in that, yeah, the fundraising strategies. What do you guys think investors should be looking at this stage, especially in South Africa, where our global status is now supposedly junk status? What do we do as a pre-revenue or concept phase businesses?
Let me go just to change the order a little bit, and then Josh probably will have some really other smart things to say, but around the fundraising aspects of it. The one thing which is a really simplistic, practical thing that I would say is that people buy people. And so we can get too caught up in the data of like downgraded and our cost of capital is more and all of these kind of things. Great things happen when you jump on a call, when you jump on a plane, when you go out there and connect with people. And so some of the other things that I get involved with have allowed me to grow as an individual, but have really allowed me to get into positions that if you followed traditional avenues, filled out forms, try to get there, you'd never do that. So you've got to go, who do I know? Who do they know? How do I have coffees with those people? And really sort of find the right sort of partners for you to do that. So I really believe that we all have it within our own networks to be able to try and move that forward, rather than thinking through in sub-investment grade, interest rate terms. Doesn't really matter. I always say, and I actually have this in a slide that I talk to often, and again, the CFOs on this chat will not agree with me. The numbers are great as long as you don't believe them, because great things don't happen on spreadsheets. Great things happen by the stories that we tell and the fact that people buy into that.
That's a perfect segue to you, Josh. I think he was talking about you.
No longer a CFO. I like being CEO more because I don't have to tell people that. No, but I think it goes back to a point that Shukri made earlier in the Jack Ma comment. It's all about the hustle. Like, I mean, this is all possible. There's still tons of money out there. There's still funds that need to put money to work. There's still investors. You just have to hustle a little bit harder. Look at your network, figure out how to make this thing work. So one prong of that is innovative funding. So the whole funding model of selling equity in a company and then building a product, all these other things, it's just a model. There's other things like revenue-based financing that could make a lot of sense. There's seller financing, as we were talking about earlier. Really thinking about the overall mechanisms to get funding into your business. You be innovative. I always say that innovation doesn't stop with the CTO. It goes in the CFO suite. It goes from the CMO. It can come all across the business. So really think about innovative ways to finance your business. I think one of the things, the major takeaways of this crisis is you need to build a real business. So think about, how do you sell a product and how do you bootstrap a company through your revenue and through your cash flow? We're finding out very quickly, if you think about your cash flow statement, if you're spending all of your cash flow from operations and only funding it with your cash flow from financing, when financing goes away, all of a sudden your business doesn't run anymore. There's a great Warren Buffett quote that I always love, that you don't know who's swimming naked till the tide goes out. There were a lot of businesses that didn't have good business models, that frankly were being held up by the financing and the very apt and very cheap funding all over the world. That's not going to happen for a while. So think about, how do I bootstrap a business? How do I sell a product and get revenue in the door and build a real company that can be cash flow positive? And the real positive aspect of that is, as soon as you sell a part of your business, as soon as you bring in external investors, you're no longer in the driver's seat. You have someone else at least with you in the driver's seat, someone else sitting across from you at the table making decisions. The only time you ever get to drive your own car is when you're cash flow positive, and when you can fund with your own cash flow. So probably the positive consequence of all this is that people are gonna have to figure out how to build real businesses for a while. And then when you do take that capital, make sure it's growth equity, make sure you have a good business and you're taking money to scale that business, as opposed to figure out how to build the business.
Okay. Asma, I want to give you one. I think it's in your arc there. Is it worth looking at other markets or regions to help generate new revenue? Do you think scaling is still an option to be thinking at this stage?
Well, I think so. I think that's another way of pivoting. And depending on the service or the type of business that you have, I think scaling into another market or looking at other markets is definitely the way to go. And again, I relate this back everything to how I was back in 2008 and what happened. And I was focused heavily on the UK market and clients actually needing services from us that relevant to the UK. And I think the one thing that I did do is to look at other markets. So we started looking at the Middle East, we started looking at Africa, we looked at the US. And so we went back to the same clients that we were working with, asking them if they wanted to have services in these other regions where we could provide services for that. And I think the one thing I've learned is that if you are having difficulty in your own market, and particularly as a result of this lockdown, then you do need to look, because if your service or your offering is something that is quite scalable, then people will be interested in buying from you. And it may be that, you know, you're offering competitive services. And I would go back to investors as well. And I personally had never took investment when I started my company. And it was because I never really understood what investment was about. So when I started, from day one, we had revenue. But now I advise companies day in and day out on how to get investment, etc. But what is important is every time I speak to an investor now, what they say is they are looking for opportunity. If there are businesses out there that are definitely scalable into other markets and they have the potential to grow and they can sell to international customer base, then they're definitely interested in investing even at this stage. So I think it is definitely what Josh and Shukri have said is pick up the phone, talk to people, have the conversation, showcase your business, tell them what it is, and then, you know, you could pretty much, you'll be surprised at what direction it could take.
I've got just two more questions, and then we need to wrap it up. And this one, it might be quite a simple one. Pierre says suggestions for revisiting definition of essential goods in South Africa during lockdown. All fresh produce in agricultural industry should be included, and not only food, so flowers and plant industry. I mean, Pierre, I don't know if anyone wants to jump. Shukri, do you want to say something to that?
I think just generally speaking, and we know some people in this kind of economic cluster of the COVID-19 South Africa team a little bit. And one of the things that I've been saying to him is that we do need an intermediate phase really thought through to be able to bring in more industries on stream. So that we can start to open up the economy a little bit. And some of that will be changing the definition of essential and perhaps bringing some of those products on stream.
Okay. Guys, if I can ask you, we actually don't have any more time. So I'm going to just take, if you can, the speakers may still be available at the tables to ask them directly. Just one interesting one here. From Bert, there seems to be a bit of anti-Chinese vibe surfacing. Do you foresee that this might negatively affect exports of products containing Chinese components?
I think people are fickle. Once this opens up and they need things to satisfy their supply chains, they're going to find it, and the market will decide what people do. And the normal laws of kind of competition will kick in. And all of this kind of anti-Chinese sentiment will be a distant memory, in my opinion.
Do you think, let me just throw it back at you then again, do you think that, because one of the things I was hoping is that corporates could really focus on buying local as we come out of lockdown, just to get some more revenue going internally? Do you think that that's a pipe dream and it's just going to go straight back to the cheapest quote?
No, I do think that one hopes that there are ways of doing business that we can continue into the post-lockdown period. And one hopes that we have found ways to rethink that, or perhaps normalize perhaps different supply chains and things that could perhaps prioritize less reliance on Chinese products and kind of promoting local. Seraj, are you going to give us a 30-second sign off, or should I do that now? Because I have one thing just more optimistically to say.
Yeah, so just there are two questions that I'm going to not ask right now. If Hisham and Sylvester want to ask someone individually at the networking, go. But I think there's also an opportunity that these Hisham's question specifically could become another a webinar at a later stage, which is how do we get more digital strategies around small business after lockdown, and mental health for entrepreneurs could also be another thing. I just need to line up the right speakers within our network to come and talk about that, but we'll answer that at a later stage. Shukri, yes, each of you a 30-second sign off. Shukri, you can start.
I just want to say, I think within a South African context, most people here are in or from South Africa, and certainly doing business in South Africa, and we have to see the joy and beauty of living in South Africa. We have a relatively low burn rate in terms of the cost of living compared to the Middle East or even the UK and the US and stuff like that. And so we really have to see the cup as half full, and it is going to turn. The world is not going to the shop and buying bread, milk, and cheese only. Very shortly, people will be buying football jerseys, traveling, going to the spa, using Kirsty's PR company, Sylvester's IT company. That's who we are as human beings. And I think that we'll see that beauty manifesting very quickly as we move out of this lockdown period.
So I would just follow on from what Shukri's just said, and I want to experience the joy of living in South Africa, but unfortunately I can't. But what I would say is I would encourage companies actually to look to expand into new markets if they have the capability to do so. So yes, whilst local is great, but if you really want to sort of become a bigger business and a scalable business, then look at other international markets and look what else you can do, who you can sell to, who you can talk to, who you can collaborate with. It may be that you can't look to expand on your own, but look for collaborators, look for people that you can partner with in an effort to try and see if you can pivot your business.
And then Josh, you can sign off.
Yeah, I mean, my team at LaunchLab is probably tired of hearing me say it, but adversity is opportunity. I mean, there's massive opportunity through all of this. If you're really an entrepreneur is not, it's not sexy. It shouldn't be on the cover of some magazine. It's a grind. It's putting your head down. It's hustling. It's being persistent. But if you find something you're passionate about, if you find something you love, then it's fun. It's a great experience. So there is a massive reshuffling of the world. There's going to be incredible opportunities that come out of all this. Take time. Like, everyone has time right now. Don't be distracted by Netflix. Don't be distracted by Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever else. Give yourself time and space to think about where you want to be in the world, what the opportunities will present, and how you can be part of those. So we all have that right now. Well, maybe we didn't a month ago or 2 months ago. Take that time, think about the meaning, purpose in your life, and where you can be part of this global economy and part of the opportunities that come out of a really difficult situation.
So there you have it. Thank you very much to our 3 guest speakers. I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Look out for notifications of more events coming up. And I really hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.